It's really lovely to have you. My name's Deepa Merchandani. For those who I've not met before, I facilitate collaborations within the Catalyst 2030 Secretariat. So it's really lovely to see you all. We've been hosting these monthly sessions as an opportunity to learn and share knowledge about collaborations. And so there are recordings on the collaborations resource pages of the website, which Julie will pop into the chat, so you've got access to past resources. Karen, it's lovely to see you. Welcome, lovely to see you. Today we have what hopefully will be a really interesting conversation and sharing opportunity and the opportunity to hear from Sandip and Steve, who are both collaborators extraordinaires, and to hear about their experiences and the kind of nuts and bolts, as we put it, of collaborating within the community, within the network, and the differences, because they're very different models. And so hopefully, you know, they'll pose opportunities for questions and sharing and learning with all of you. And so we're going to start so that we can get as much conversation going as possible. But the format for today will be me posing a couple of questions to Sandip and to Steve, and then we'll do that for about half an hour, and then it'll be opportunity for open discussion. So hopefully that sounds like a good plan. Yes, definitely, of course, we'll pop that into the chat. So I'm going to start with, I think it'd be great just to hear a little bit briefly about the aims of your respective collaborations. So we set the scene of where we're at. Steve, can we start with you and an intro to Bounce Beyond?
Sure, thanks so much. It's great to be here. Collaboration has been a theme through most of my work, because for over 40 years, I've been working on transformation, and transformation requires a scale of work well beyond anything I can do. And so the automatic default is collaboration, because we've got to bring together more people to be able to realize the scale and the complexity, deal with the complexity that's associated with transformation. So Bounce Beyond started a couple of years ago, and Karen on this call is also an active participant and founder of Bounce Beyond. And we have been working to shift the economic paradigm. And that's required relationships with an internal team of people we refer to as stewards, stewarding the development of Bounce Beyond and its activities, its strategy, etc., to be able to be this broader, engaging platform. So recognizing we're just at a certain stage of development of Bounce Beyond, with collaboration being a key component. The other, so we have this internal team, which is, we have no staff purposefully, we've decided not to have any staff. And we have then also what we call connects. These are communities that are organizing around transformation. And so currently we have one in the European Health Futures arena, the global sustainable seafood community, all those efforts working to create sustainable seafood world. Costa Rica, we've been working with a key leader there. And in Canada, we've been working with another emerging entity. And in Southwest England, we've also been working. So we have this other collaboration group that we refer to as communities that are organizing around particular geographies or issues with seafood. The other core component is what we refer to as strategic partners. And these are organizing efforts or some form of organization, which is very aligned with our goal and has a particular role in developing powerful, what we call transformation systems. So working with the communities and ourselves to be able to further realize this economic transformation. So an example is Humanity Rising, which does a series of daily webinars on what the latest is happening in transformation, as we would describe it. And they've featured us. I can go into that more detail, but and then Karen is also leading FemQ. And so we consider FemQ a key partner to bring in a feminist perspective, a feminine voice and consciousness perspective to what we're doing. So I will stop there.
Oh, thank you so much. Gosh, in terms of thinking about models, you've got countries, you've got strategic partners, you've got communities, got all going on. Sandip, it'd be great to hear about COVID Action collaboration.
Thanks, Deepa. Greetings, everyone. My name is Sandip. I work with the COVID Action Collaborative in India, and I especially look after the monitoring, evaluation, research functions. And I will be sharing our experiences in COVID Action Collab. We started this in the week of COVID when initially in January 2020, cases of COVID infection started coming in. And then our partners in the Catalyst group, which I belong to, not this Catalyst 2030, but the Catalyst group in India. And our partners started requesting for help. And then we thought we should get together and do something, because we could clearly see partners and their communities and our own communities that we work with in stress, right? And in problems. And lockdown was announced, as most of you would know, Government of India actually announced lockdown. As a result of that, many communities were in deep stress and they needed help. And I think the immediate requirement was that of relief and rescue. That was during the wave one, if most of you would remember. Relief and rescue was the primary requirement. So we thought, how do we handle this situation? Because obviously we are deeply saddened by what people were facing, their challenges. And as development actors, we thought we have a responsibility to do something. And how do we do that? So we thought, okay, we could start doing something on our own, but then we quickly realized that the nature of the problem is pretty big. And then we won't be able to address it on our own. So therefore, the need to get together and join hands so that not only we reach out to more number of people, but also we bring in expertise and strengths so that we are able to address larger problems. We have around 350 partners, and these are implementers, providers, and enablers. Implementers are organizations who have presence on the ground and they implement programs. Enablers are people who could capacitate, provide technical support, and providers are essentially providers of resources, materials, and those kind of things. We largely three strategies we have: calibrated services, calibrated to the requirements of the community, to the needs of the community, which has been very dynamic throughout the pandemic. Then impact canvas for emerging problems which do not have solutions, and then solution exchange, right? So give and take between partners. And we looked at relief, recovery, and resilience for focusing on health, food, social protection, and livelihood finance. Outcomes that we focused on: resilient and thriving vulnerable communities, effective, efficient, resilient institution, dynamic humanitarian response systems. I'll stop here, Deepa. Maybe we can go to the next question.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for that. So what's really interesting is that your collaborations are at polar ends of time spectrums. So Sandip, yours is very much a rapid response emergency situation, whilst see Bounce Beyond has a longer term trajectory in thinking about shifting the whole economic system, both of which, you know, ambitious in both the objectives. Could you describe a little bit about how this time trajectory factor has factored into the formation, the planning, and the design of how you've brought about your collaborations? Steve, maybe we could start with you and the Bounce Beyond model.
So I think I'm very interested in learning more about Sandip and what he's doing, but I think one of the pieces for us is that although we do emphasize the urgency for economic transformation, by its very nature, it's not quite as urgent as what Sandip is aiming for. It requires more collective, large-scale orientation. We have a core concept that we call transformation systems. So around any particular, so it's about organizing all of the transformation activities that are happening around a particular issue or a particular geography to be able to cohere and align and reach synergies. So our core work is about transformation. These transformation systems, for example, to be more concrete, in Costa Rica, we're aiming to bring together all of those initiatives in Costa Rica, which are aiming for a regeneration or working to shift the country in favor of regeneration. And Karen is taking some co-leadership with this work. So in seafood, it's bringing together all of those efforts in the seafood arena that are trying to shift towards sustainability. And so we've already been engaged with the seafood one, for example, for 2 years. And it's about being able to support them to see their system and then take collective action in it. So when you're dealing with a very wide range and a very large number of initiatives, it requires a different time horizon. And one thing we've developed that I can talk about more in terms of doing this is what we call collaboration agreements with particular entities to be able to develop a mutual understanding, integration of each other's goals, articulating the value proposition, etc.
Sorry. Could you tell us a little bit more about, because quite interesting, this collaborative agreements. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you went about kind of identifying those partners and then deciding what needed to be part of those agreements? Like, what are the factors that you were, was it roles and responsibilities? Was it about timings and deadlines, or was it about shared understanding? Tell us a little bit more about the collaboration agreements.
Well, just to put it in a bit of context, in the 1990s, I worked a lot with business, government, civil society collaborations, again, around change. In the aughts, I started working with global action networks, as I call them, global multi-stakeholder change networks like Forest Stewardship Council, Transparency International, the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, etc. And one thing I noticed in my work with these in these fields was that people were not very well aligned, because everyone focused upon, number one, the goal that they were trying to achieve. And it was the collective goal they were trying to achieve. And they did not give sufficient attention to the distinctive goals that they are trying to achieve. So although Humanity Rising is, for example, very much trying to achieve the goal of, supportive of the goal of economic transformation, its main activity is around creating a community and promoting information about how that's being done. So we have to therefore provide, our part of the agreement is providing them with that content. and that's reaching their goal, although we do have this overlapping goal. So I noticed that people were not explicit about the distinctive goals. And so people talk a lot about synergies and the benefits of working together without being sufficiently attentive to being specific about what those expected outcomes are. So that's one reason that we developed the collaborative agreements. I should say that all of this is always in the context of learning more about how to do this better. I'm just sharing with you the way we've learned to do it, but we certainly don't feel that we have it down pat. And I think it is a big learning field still operationally. The way we go about identifying partners, it's to date, it's been quite opportunistic, if I could put it that way. Karen, for example, has been involved in Bounce Beyond. We've recognized she has a distinct agenda, and we've recognized that we can support FemQ in bringing forward the feminist intelligence in the world, and it's got to be a big part of the economy. So, for instance, last summer, Karen organized a major conference, and we provided a lot of the speakers, or a lot of the speakers Karen brought forward and participants in the conference were connected to the Bounce Beyond community. So obviously that's a natural connection as well. With Humanity Rising, I'd been in touch with them already about various things they were doing. We could see how this could evolve into a more productive relationship. So I'm afraid that I'm afraid to say we've had an opportunistic approach to partnerships up to now, but we have to be much more strategic about them as well.
And that's really interesting, because I'm going to loop in Sandip here, because when time is of the essence and you're dealing with an emergency situation, you also had an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, with the partners that you brought in. But when you are time tight and you're dealing with an emergency situation, what principles and values do people come together with in that MOU? How did you kind of decide what would be included in it, and who would be the signatories of it, and who you would partner with?
As much as Steve says that he would like to learn from us, I see he's sitting with a wealth of information and experience. Steve, we would also like to learn from you, right? We can never be complacent about our knowledge and experience, because especially in emergency setting, what we realized is that it is a VUCA situation that we are dealing with. It is complex, it is always emerging, it's throwing new and new challenges at you. Now, how do you address that situation, right? And you asked especially about the memorandum of understanding, and what we did initially is that since we have been working in the sector for around 25 years now, we have our own social capital. We know organizations, we have worked with many organizations, we have relationship with them. We brought in those partners together initially to begin with. And then we figured out that they also needed help. They also wanted to reach out to their communities, right? The people were important. So therefore, we said, let's begin with the immediate circle. And then we reached out to people whom we knew, whom we had worked with, or our partners had worked with. And we said that, would you like to join hands? Because we can't do it alone. We don't have all the expertise. We cannot reach out to the geographies that we are working in. And then obviously we don't have the insights about your communities. What are the specific challenges that they're facing with? The kind of challenge that I probably faced being a city dweller was probably completely different from a person living in a very remote area in India, right? So then we increased the number, and we said that unless and until we get together, it is going to be difficult even to let's say, generate resources. I mean, we needed resources, right? But rather than one single organization going and asking for resources, it was making a lot more sense to say that problems may not be same, but they would be similar in some sense. If we get together, look at what all problems and challenges we are facing and how would we like to address it, then we can show a collaborative face, go and ask for support, ask for help. That was the essence of it. And then we had a charter which was very loose kind of things, and we said that if you feel we are misaligned, please come in, right? And it's up to you. If you don't want to join hands, that is fine. If you want to do something else, that's okay. There is no foundation. And then specific assignment, and then we started working. Whatever resources we had at our disposal, we started using those. And as I said, that people were primary, people's needs were primary, their challenges were primary. So therefore what we did was that whatever resources we could scramble from our own pocket, from our partners pocket, we requested partners that whatever resources you have, if you can utilize that at your end, whatever resources we had, we brought it in. And subsequently, after several months, when investment started coming in, and then we looked at what are the specific investment that somebody would like to do, and we started having very specific agreements with partners, which was assignment based and grant based.
Okay, brilliant. And in terms of I'm gonna move to our kind of the final question, which is a lot about, and I know, Andrea, I'm gonna come to you and ask you to talk about your question in a sec. But we talk about chemistry and trust when bringing about systems collaborations. Are you able to share what you think are the characteristics of systems collaborators and what makes a good collaborator? Because, and similarly to, Andrea's point about cultures of organizations and group culture, how do you know who you can collaborate with? And how do you know when you've picked right, or maybe if things go a little bit wrong? What are the characteristics you're looking for?
Well, for me, one of the key questions is around ego. And if there are many people who feel it's very important to put their logo out first, or their name out first, or for them to be associated with ownership. And collaboration depends upon co-ownership and collective development and collective commitment and promoting each other. As I hope I've been doing, as an illustration with Karen and the work she's doing. So that's one thing I always look for. In terms of trust, I found that it's useful to think of trust as having at least three components. One is trust in language. That is, that when somebody uses a word, we understand what it means coming out of their mouths. And because very often people will use a word like collaboration, and it means something very different to them than it does to me. So there's got to be a development of a collective language in the collaboration, and that simply takes time. There is the trust in intent, and that has to do with values. So originally, years ago, I would have always emphasized you've got to be clear about your shared goal. For me, it's about shared values coming before goals, but the values that you would like to see embedded in whatever your goals are. So it's about the shared intent as well. A third element of trust is simply trust in ability to be able to do what one says one is trying to do. So, for example, somebody will say, well, I can perform a transformative evaluation process. Well, can they? And you've got to have some sort of trust that they can actually do that, and to be able to go through a process of learning about what one is going to do that, to be able to develop that trust, rather than maybe you can see that they've done it before, and therefore that's the description. But there's a process of building relationship and knowledge of each other that's got to be integrated as an ongoing part of the relationship building process. I'm sure everyone's familiar with this.
It's really interesting. But so Sandip, what do you do when you don't have time on your side and you're in an emergency? What are you looking for? Because I'm presuming the point that Steve just said in terms of ability in what is, can somebody deliver what they say they're going to do becomes very critical when you're dealing with an emergency situation.
Yes, I can share what we did actually, but when you ask what do you do, I would say one thing. I think just show up and do it. Remember the Nike advertisement? I think just show up and do it. I think the concern was there in our heart, saying that we must do something about it. We know certain things, right? Get across to as many people as possible. Start working, start addressing people's issues. Let's go and speak to government. Let's go and speak to private sector. Let's go and speak to as many people as required, right? You want medical doctors coming in, let's go and bring in medical doctors. You want logistics experts coming in, let's go and bring in logistics experts and see what can be done. And Steve, all those things that you shared actually rhymes in my ear, because some of it we did reflect on, and some of it, as you said, I think it's correct. And all those things, collective values and all those things that you said, I think is very true. But our motto was that be agile, right? Be agile to the need and be on your toes. And it is not that we did everything well. We faced a lot of challenges. And as Deepa was saying that not every partner came in. I mean, they came in, they were there with us for some time and they said, no, we're not happy with what you are doing. So we allowed them to go away. And then that's very much possible. But I think our focus was more on people, their needs, and how are we able to meet or not meet it. I think that was the essence, Deepa. Otherwise, what we did was that we developed a very flexible framework. We had a multi-layered TOC, theory of change, which we simplified for people to understand what will the community achieve, what will the institutions achieve, what will happen at ecosystem level. And we had multidisciplinary design platforms, right? Saying that what is it that you can do best? Can you do evidence generation? Can you do tracking best? Please do that. So assemble a quick, smaller team to do it, right? Can you distribute materials well? Do you have access to the community? We put together a small team and they started operating. So there are smaller teams, not only within our group, but smaller teams within partner organizations also operating in tandem, right? Providing the support. Then we had, as I said, we had roles and responsibilities. Three categories I shared with you: implementers, enablers, and providers. Do what you do best. Bring in your expertise, right? And we said that our intervention should be focused, grounded, and it should be decentralized action, right? If a partner 500 kilometers away and their communities are facing relief challenges or food challenges, the idea is to provide food support first, because people need to eat food. Then only we will think of what's happening to the pandemic. It's not a health problem all the time. It's not a medical problem all the time. It is much more beyond that. That's what we did. And all the time we were very, very focused on certain things, is that who creates, who owns, and who drives, right? Who is accountable at the end of it? Tomorrow, if the community is asking for support, and we are not able to provide support, right? And it has happened because resources sometimes were not available and we failed. Who owns that? Are we standing up and owning it, saying that we made a mistake or we blundered actually? Those kind of things we brought in.
It's amazing. Thank you so much. I'm gonna hand over. Steve, is there anything you'd like to add before I hand over? I'm gonna go to Andrea first, if possible. Andrea, hopefully you're there. Because I thought you might like to ask the questions. Lovely to see you, Andrea.
Two questions, and correct me if I don't get those questions. One is that you said what did we do when we found a gap, agreements, and how did we address it? Are these the two questions?
Yes, thank you.
Was that the second question? Okay. Um, in the first case, there are gaps. There are gaps we have not been able to address. Like, for example, partners' demand versus what we could deliver, right? If they wanted a certain amount of resources, it is not that in all cases we have been able to deliver resources, and it is not that we were giving. I mean, we were not a medium through which resources were going. We tried several things whereby we said, okay, can if there is an investor, if there is a funder who is ready to fund a certain response program, we tried our best to say that you don't give the resources to us, right? You give the resources to partners, not to us. But what happened was that often, being emergency situation, there were many private sector funders who came to us and they wanted to route it through us, right? And there was a mismatch. And while we were trying to establish relations, direct relations with them, some of the cases we could achieve what we wanted to do, some of the cases we could not achieve. Whatever we could arrange for them, we arranged. Now, some partners left, they exited the collaborative, not because resources could not be arranged, but often they thought that they would like to do something else, and that's why they left. And wherever there was a gap, we requested partners to continue in the collaborative, and then we looked at what is the other possible thing that we could possibly do. I mean, there is one of you generate resources, but can we unlock something? Can we work with the local government to generate resources? Can we unlock the social protection programs of the government so that people get benefited? If we keep the ultimate benefit to people in mind, is what is it that we could possibly do to address those gaps? That's what we have done. But as I said, it's not 100% achievement all the time. And that is how we dealt with the situation. Did I answer your second question?
Yes.
Did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I wanted to touch in particular, provide a resource for you. There's somebody who I think is very knowledgeable about, a group that's very knowledgeable about multi-stakeholder partnership. I just thought of it when you said, is anyone going to produce a guide for us? And that's sort of what this is. Let me just put it in the chat. I think it's available free too, from some sources in the Netherlands. But one thing was around money. And money, it can be a corrosive element, and transparency. And I am radical, perhaps, in my view about how money should be transparent, but it's also got to be discussable. And people come with very different needs and very different sort of situations about money. And so it's important to understand that and identify, first of all, whether or not you can work together, because somebody's money expectations and needs might be so great that you just can't work together. Or whether, and it's not a simple thing about saying everyone should be paid the same, because people are in very different situations. And yet you've got to be radically transparent about it. And so we have developed a payment policy that is transparent and that sets limits and processes about how money is allocated for payment for people. And we also make any payments public so that people can have access to, so they'll know what each other's getting paid. There's another process that I've been very impressed with. I'm participating in right now, a collaboration, and they went through an extensive process for being able to identify how to actually distribute money ahead of time, because often what happens is that somebody says, oh, I'd like you to collaborate, and that means that they want you to do something for free. And then that sort of seems not quite right. I know I was invited to do this World Bank seminar, and there were 4 people who were interviewing me, and in prep for the seminar, the workshop I was going to give. And I said, and what about payment for me? And oh, and I just thought, oh God, but you've got to be able to make these things discussable and clear. And
I will say actually that we're putting together a guidebook for members on collaboration. And what we'd like this to be is a repository of different resources. So Steve, thank you so much for that link, because we'll make sure that that goes in. And what we'd like this to be is a living document. So as resources or tools come in from across the world and from members, we've got a shared repository of those tools that we're going to try and put together. So that's coming soon. I know Sylvia had a question in the chat. Sylvia, I don't know if you wanted to, you wanted to ask it directly, because that's so much nicer. Project-based collaborations versus systems change collaborations. Is there a difference? Steve, I feel like I can feel you ticking on this.
Well, I think a lot of project-based collaboration has to do with coordination rather than what I would call collaboration. That is, you need somebody to do something because you need another skill brought in, or you need another resource, or somebody who has access to something. And so it's more about coordination. And I just don't think you have to get into all of these details that are required for systems change, because systems change requires much more knowledge of mutual commitment to the same values. If you find out that you just are not working on it with a similar value structure, it will destroy the collaboration, because you're having to do this over a longer period of time. There's a lot of ambiguity, as opposed to coordination when there's usually very specific outputs and activities. In systems change, there's a lot of ambiguity. People have to be able to handle paradox, contradiction, ambiguity. And so it's a much more intense, I would say, it's got to be a lived experience, and people have got to be willing to live that together.
Really interesting. What's your take on, Steve, that's made me think about something Jacob said in his session, which was when you're co-designing for systems change collaboration, the being open to the fact that you might change. You as an individual may change, but then there may be a need for your organization to also change as you go through a systems collaboration and you're thinking about an ecosystem. What are your thoughts on that? And, and acknowledging that from the outset, how important is that, or is it not so much?
Well, I'd say if you're not willing to change, you're in the wrong business if you're going to collaborate. You gotta change. You gotta be willing to change yourself. That's the whole thing about collaboration.
But it may be that
open to discovery.
But it may be that you find that actually the organization or perspective needs to shift in terms of what you're delivering, because you're holding a mirror up to yourself, and that's quite hard. How do you do that?
Karen's got
the answer. You're on mute, Karen.
I think it's been mentioned several times that I couldn't help myself but jump in, because I've been working with Steve for so long in Bounds Beyond, FemQ, and here in Costa Rica with a very important initiative that's happening here. And one of the things that I notice, as you've just raised, Deepa and Steve, you commented on, the deep transformation that's needed inside of us is the transformation. And my experience of working in collaboration for years in alliances in Australia with multi-million-dollar projects, where people experience being seen, heard, and valued for who they are, and their contribution is critical. versus I'm a project or I'm an organization and this is what I bring. So for me, whoever's, as you've just said it, Steve, it's critical that we examine that, but also whoever's the leader or the spokesperson or the person that is representing the organization that goes into the collaboration has to be able to transform themselves and bring that back to the organization. It's ways of being, not just what we do. And I see so much in collaboration is focused on the tasks, the milestones, and of course, in an emergency like Sandip is speaking to, it's critical. You can't do that deep inner work when you're in survival. But in a long-term program, that's critical. And that influencer has to be able to shape and shift the organization, because otherwise the pressure comes from the system and the organization upon that influencer or leader, and they can't cope with this paradox of we're collaborating, but we're not. It's a branding exercise, but it's collaboration. So I think that deep regard for the person that's participating in the collaboration as the spokesperson for the organization is critical. And that's certainly something Steve and I have discovered in the work we've been doing over the last 2 years.
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
the deep inner work we have to do.
And if I could just add, Karen would be a good person to have a feature on one of these talks as well, because we're actually working as Bounce Beyond with her around the concept of agreements, how we create agreements and have that as a basis of a collaboration environment. And she has a lot of, she's been developing very interesting approaches to that. And I think people would find that very valuable too.
That's a voluntelling, Karen, right there. You're being Giroud.
Well, just to say, it's the unconscious and the conscious agreements we make. We're all making the unconscious ones every day. We have to make them explicit.
I'm going to go to Jackie, and then and then we'll come back to Sandip, because I'm quite interested to know, as you're reflecting, because you said you're in reflection stage at the moment, and the kind of evolution from emergency to. So where this kind of thinking that Karen and Steve are talking about is featuring in that reflection and thinking for your model that you're working to. Do you want me to give you a sec to ponder that, and we go to Jackie?
Sure.
Sandip, I'm going to come to you with a response to that first, if that's all right.
No, I do. To Karen's point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do fully agree with what she has to offer, because as I was sharing is that, Steve also spoke about egos, right? So we call it logos and egos. We all have. I would be actually lying if I said that we do not have. We all of us have. Therefore, any other organization should also have that. It is natural to have that, right? And then we took it head on, saying that, guys, we need to resolve this. And let's look at the larger purpose. And if we keep fighting about our egos and our logos, let's find out a solution. Like, what is it? It should find a place, right? It should find a recognition, right? Therefore, we created shared spaces, right? Not only within the immediate organizational forums, even outside, right? And we provided opportunities for partners to come in and showcase their work, right? You showcase it, right? If there is a small forum or a large forum, you want to do experience sharing, please come in. But we must resolve the issues of logos and egos, right? And we have to be transparent about it, right? Unless we do that, trust building never happens. And if the trust deficit is there, if the trust levels are low, we can't progress too much. We will do some work, but we can't go in the long run. And I was looking at Sylvia's question of what is the difference, project-based and system-based. Now, the project-based challenges may or may not be very deep, but essentially the system-based challenges are deep and wide, which is what we experienced in case of COVID, right? And it's long term. You cannot solve it in a year's time. It is unfolding. Next year, some other challenge is there. If the new variants come in, some other challenges will come in, right? Mm-hmm. So the impact is wide, deep, and it is long term. And it requires very diverse expertise coming in. So, and I am not going to be an expert if I work in agriculture sector. I am not going to be an expert in health, right? I need people who are working in health to guide me what is that basic minimum that I should do to ensure that people get vaccinated in time, right? And you can bring in other examples also. That's what we have been doing. Even now, that's what we are doing.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much, Sandeep. Steve, did you have any reflections on Jackie's comments? And then I'll bring in others who may be Fawad, Ava, and others who've, Camilla, you might be doing school run, I think. You're on mute, Steve.
Sorry, just a reflection that when she was talking about big versus small organizations, is that it brings up the question of power relationships, which are a key element in creating a not successful or successful collaboration. And there's so many ways that power can express itself. And if you can't talk about it, it's really going to limit the power of the collaboration. Because many of these things we discover while we are enacting activity together. Well, we think we're collaborating, and then we discover something about, oh, well, you're making all these assumptions and I don't agree with them. Can you actually say that? You've got to be able to have a discussion about it, because it's only through the lived experience of trying to do something together that you actually understand. You really understand each other. And that's why I stress the importance of values. Like there's got to be a value base that you can come back to all the time and say, well, we valued openness and transparency and discussion, and that's why I'm bringing this up, is because this has arisen to me. So it's always referencing and enacting that touchstone of the values that I think is a very important foundation.
No, that's really important. I think this idea of, I think there's respect and power dynamics, and so much of what we say we're about is about redressing and like looking at those power dynamics. But when you're on the other side of it, when you're experiencing it, it's quite hard to call it out or know how to deal with that. Any questions or reflections as I'm conscious of time? We've got about another 5 minutes if there are kind of any other questions, reflections. Ava, would you like to reflect?
Well, in my experience, well, first of all, thank you for all your perspectives and your presentation, because it really speaks to very much to the background of the work that I've been doing. I would say 3 things. One, the relationships are always between people, not between a person and an organization. And so you can think, when you're actually looking for collaborations, well, this organization looks amazing, but it's actually the person who is the leader, the heart of the organization. The collaboration is a personal connection. And so from there, I go to the ethical issues, which are about respect and honesty, which is how you can build trust. And so there has to be that transparency and that honest relationship that's willing to share the good sides and the difficult sides and the challenges. And then the third thing that I very much agree is that we've had a saying in some of our work: you leave the power car in the parking lot. The power car is not part of this relational agreement or bond, because that's the core of being able to work together, is to be able to trust that we're dealing honestly with the other person. And so and then one other thing, and that resonates, is and one of you has indicated the agreements that are signed are almost really secondary. I've been in situations where people spent a lot of time trying to figure out the fine words of an agreement, what they needed to have started with, well, how do we relate to each other? And in one particular case, a very important project was in fact sabotaged because they couldn't actually agree to the language of an agreement. And really what they couldn't agree is they couldn't agree to figuring out how to work with each other personally. So the agreement became the excuse.
Oh, wow. As before we close, I'm gonna ask both of you actually, what gives you hope to still collaborate? Because it's not easy. So very briefly, both of you, is there still hope, and what makes you do it as a closing thought from you? Sandip, will come to you first.
Celebrate success, and success never comes without failure. So take it in your stride. If we are focused on people and their challenges, if we are bothered about it, if that is what motivates us, I think that is what gives us hope.
Steve?
I guess that I find the joy of collaboration one of my compelling attractions to it. Simply learning how other people are seeing the world, and experiencing that with them, and then being open enough to to share it with me in a collaborative way. But also the issues that we're facing. There's no other way to work. It's about our evolution, I think, as a planet, as human beings, as organizing forms. Working in a collaborative spirit is the only way that we can address and move into our full potential.
I love it. And with that, this idea of moving into our full potential, please do let us know what other learning sessions you'd like, what other topics. Karen, we're going to be in touch to plan yours. So thank you very much for that, Steve. But if there are other things that you'd like to learn, if there are other things that you would, I think the best way is obviously learning from each other. So if we can facilitate that and anchor those sessions, then please do let us know. And we will try our very best to do it. And to Steve and to Sandip, thank you so much for sharing your mornings and your evening with us. It is with deep gratitude that you've helped us all learn and hopefully do a little bit better today. So thank you so much. And I wish you all very beautiful rest of your mornings, afternoons, and evenings.